Hey, this is David Miller with
Anne Marie Miller.
Got her again. No tennis today, and we are here to help you get real estate smart. So today we're talking about seller's disclosures. So let's think about the good old days back before we had a lot of realtors out there. We had a lot of people back in the early 20s and 30s that were selling properties that they knew had defects to them to unsuspecting buyers. So what has happened over the years is that as a seller, you're required to disclose latent defects on the property that would affect the material value of the property. So what is a latent defect? So a latent defect is something that is not seen by the naked eye. So it's something that you know about, but if I'm a buyer walking through the property, I'm not going to know that you had a leak in the roof behind this thing here.
5 years ago.
Yeah, 5 years ago. So it's something that is required in the state of Florida for you to disclose. Now, I will tell you that as a listing agent working with sellers, this is what I tell my sellers. You want to disclose everything, okay, because it helps you from a liability perspective. If you had a leak in the roof, disclose, had a leak in the roof in 2010, repaired it 2010. Let me tell you why you need to do that. Is because what happens is you sell the house, a year later it leaks in the same spot. They bring a roofer out and the roofer tells you, hey, want to let you know it leaked here before. That buyer is going to get on the phone and they're going to say, I want you to pay for this because you never told me about this. Well, here's the nice thing about seller's disclosure. Most brokerages have this already set up. It's about 5 pages that ask you questions about the property. So if you disclosed it, you'll find at the bottom of every page, if you can see this here, that the buyer and seller initial off of every page. So as a seller, you want to disclose everything because if the buyer comes back to you, you would call your realtor like me and we would pull up page 4 and we would say, well, we did disclose that to you and you signed off on it, and then the buyer will hang up the phone and say thank you very much. So that's why as a seller you want to do it. So Anne Marie, let me ask you.
Let me just interrupt you for just a second. The other thing that's good for that is the fact that everybody, when you go through a real estate transaction, both buyers and sellers are both timid and cautious on who to trust. And if, as a seller, I can tell you as a buyer specialist, if the seller does come forward and tell this, this, and this, and we go through the inspections and they find all those things, it builds a lot of trust that the seller really took care of the house. So it puts the buyer's minds at ease as opposed to finding out later something that we as the buyers had to find out about and the seller wasn't forthcoming. That poses some friction. So I just wanted to bring that.
No, absolutely, absolutely. So what needs to be put into a seller's disclosure? As I mentioned, the brokerages have a 5-page document you can fill out, but you're going to be getting questions. What type of things are usually in a seller's disclosure, Anne Marie?
Oh gosh, well, the big ticket items, you know, the roof. When was the roof put on? Does the plumbing have polybutylene piping in it, which was a very experimental thing that they did between 1985 and 1995. What type of electrical is in there if it's an older house, and how old the AC is. That's very, very important. As a buyer specialist, we want to look at the big ticket items that are going to cost buyers money after they purchase the house. So, and those are really the big ticket items.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, what things do not need to be in the seller's disclosure? This may surprise you, but in the state of Florida, if there was a murder or a suicide in that house...
What? They can't disclose that?
That was pretty good.
Thank you.
Excuse the plane flying over. But yeah, you do not need to disclose that in the state of Florida. Now, if you have a high-profile case and everybody knows about it, it's going to be disclosed for you anyways. But
yeah,
what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, so what I do is typically, Google is my best friend. So what I do with my buyers is that if there's
number 2.
Yeah, if there's anything in question, I'll go straight to Google and I'll say 123 Main Street and see what pops up. I can guarantee you that if a murder's taken place or a suicide or anything that's been marked in public records, it's going to show up. If it's gone in the newspapers, it's going to go up. Even sinkholes as well. Those are things that have happened in particular neighborhoods that I've had to look up.
Another reason why you want to be working with the right realtor that does that due diligence on your behalf to protect you during the entire transaction. Now, Amory, if I'm a buyer and I have the seller's disclosure and it discloses everything that I have on here, do I still need to do the inspections? I mean, that's going to save me money if I don't need to do the inspection.
You absolutely have to do the inspections. Absolutely.
Why?
Because, thank you, David, for segueing that. The inspections are the meat of whether or not you're going to go through with this house or not. You have to be okay as a buyer with the things that are wrong with the property. Being that we're in a seller's market, the majority of the contracts that are written are as-is contracts. So you're as-is with right to inspect. So contractually, you can't come back to the seller to ask them to repair anything, but you have to be okay with purchase. If you're a buyer, you have to be okay as a buyer to go forward with the latent defects that are in the house that are uncovered during the inspection. So yes.
And the main reason is that the seller is only disclosing what they know about. Okay, so if they don't know about a roof leak or they don't know that they have polybutylene piping, they're not going to disclose it, and you can't come back on them because they didn't know that they had that before, believe it or not. So it's very important every time you buy a property that you do have it disclosed,
and you also
want to inspections.
And you also want to do a WDO inspection, wood destroying organism inspection, or termite inspection, to make sure, regardless of whether, that's a whole nother topic, but regardless of whether it's a wood frame house or a concrete block house, you still want to do that.
Now, another question we get a lot, Amory, is that I'm the seller, I had it under contract, I had inspections done, and something came up, and let's say it's polybutylene piping, and we couldn't keep the deal together, and the deal went south, so I put it back on the market. So, as the seller, do I now need to change the original disclosure that I had and state that we have polybutylene piping?
It's a great question, David.
Thanks for working with me.
You're welcome. So, is this new information that the seller is aware of?
Yes.
Then absolutely they have to put that on there.
Absolutely.
On there.
So that's a great point, because a lot of times we think that as sellers that we don't have to put it on there even though we just found out, but you would have to put that on there if the buyer took you to court and proved that you did have an inspection beforehand and that was on the inspection report and you did not disclose it. That would not be good. So once again, we want to make sure that you're educated so we can protect you on the listing perspective as well as from a buyer perspective. So if you ever want a copy of a seller's disclosure, we'd be glad to email one to you. Just IM us on our Facebook page and we'd be glad to send that to you, or shoot an email to themillers@kw.com. That's themillers@kw.com. And once again, we hope that we got something out of this here and we helped you get
Real estate smart.
Take care. Have a good day.
Bye.
And here's my wife until I turn it off.
Okay.